Good evening. It is 6 p.m. Wednesday, November 9th. We are at the Keizer Civic Center. Call to order the Keizer Planning Commission meeting. Second order of business, approval of minutes. Everybody should have gotten those from Debbie. Can I get a motion for the minutes, please?
I move to accept the minutes as presented.
Second.
Yay. We have a motion by Commissioner Saldivar and a second by Commissioner Herb. Any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously with one absent, Debbie. All right. Appearance of interested citizens. Empty. Wonderful. It's great to see a couple of people in the audience. Thank you for being here tonight. You're here at every meeting, so it's great having you. All right, we have a public hearing tonight on the draft amendments to the Keizer Development Code relating to stormwater management. I will open the public hearing at 6:01. Shane, take it away.
Thank you, Chair Lawyer, Planning Commissioners. So tonight we have a couple sections of code before us for your consideration. Primarily Section 2.306, which has long been known as the storm drainage chapter. Essentially in the packet, there was a whole section that had a big note on it that said this chapter to be replaced with the next chapter. So we put that in there for your reference, but that's what the code has been for, I think, since about 2000 or 2001. This has been a section of the code that's been kind of on our list of things that we have known we were going to need to update at some point in the future. And it just happens to be that now is that time. So the language in the proposed section, it's a lot briefer. And the primary reason for that is that previously we had a lot of standards listed out in the code, actual requirements and design standards and rainfall event things and things that, frankly, Mr. Lawyer can explain a lot better than Shane can. But what we've chose to do is now the code is still there. It still spells out what has to be submitted for development plans and when you're going to develop property, what you're going to need to do. However, those technical elements live in the Public Works design standards and construction specifications. So we refer to those instead. So that's kind of structurally the big difference of why it went from a bunch of pages to like 4 pages. So I kind of wanted to point that out. And then obviously the other thing is the name of the chapter has changed, not just storm drainage, but rather stormwater management now, which is a more inclusive term, I think. And Mr. Lawyer is here. The other section we're changing is our definition section. It seems like every time we do a text amendment, we get to change the definition section. But due to comments made in the past, I did not put the entire definition section, which was a ton of pages. I just lifted the one definition we're changing. So you can thank me later for that, but I tried to pare it down a little. And that was basically to clarify that development includes redevelopment as well, not just brand new development. So with that, I mean, ultimately the code is being changed because we are under compulsion to do so based on the permit that we have. The design standards and the construction specification, the technical pieces have gone through our Stormwater Advisory Committee. And this is kind of a result of that work. So the big piece is the development code needs to have a hook and a tie-in to those things that frankly we've already been requiring developers to do because it's kind of lives in our permit requirements that are driven by state law. I think that's about all I'm going to say on it, but I will turn it over to Mr. Lawyer, our Public Works Director, and he can add whatever I didn't cover. So.
Thanks, Shane. I think you did a good job of summarizing the need on why we have to update this section of the development code. As additional background, the city is what's considered a phase 2 community by DEQ. Phase 2 stormwater permit was required. We obtained our first permit, I think it was in 2008. That permit was, I'll say, loosely regulatory, okay? There was some regulatory requirements contained in there, but it wasn't real specific. As we came around to our permit renewal period, DEQ took a considerable amount of time going through the process to get the requirements in place. Phase 2 cities across the state challenged DEQ It was a long and arduous process, ultimately resulted in getting a permit submitted and that was activated or in force in March of 2019. In that permit is a requirement for us to update our development code and design standards, construction specifications to be compliant with the requirements contained in the permit, most of which is water quality stuff, okay? As Shane mentioned, the previous section, storm drainage section of the development code had some technical criteria included in it. As we move forward in time with the requirements in our phase 2 permits, we implemented things differently than were in the development code, more stringent, higher requirements. There was some allowance within the code that the public works director could basically say, you have to do this, and I don't care what the code says, but you have to do that. I'm paraphrasing and simplifying it, but the reality is development through the city has basically been following the guidelines and the requirements in our new design standards and what's consistent with what we're proposing for the development code for a number of years. As we went through the design standard update, we considered Salem, Marion County, because we want to look at things regionally, try and make sure there's consistency amongst the agencies, that we're not being too easy or too difficult, and still meeting our permit requirements. Marion County is a phase 2 community as well. Salem is a phase 1 community, so they initially had higher requirements than Keizer. The phase 2 permit that was issued actually had higher requirements for the phase 2s than the phase 1s. The phase 1s are going through a permit renewal process now, so I would expect their requirements are going to go up. Anyway, all of that to be said, the result of what we came up with the design standards and the development code change, again, is consistent region-wide. It's what we've been doing and implementing for a number of years. We sent this all out to local engineering firms that do development in Keizer for their feedback, the design standards I'm talking about, to make sure they could provide us any feedback or concerns. We really didn't receive anything, and I believe a lot of that has to do with we developed them around what we've been doing and what's consistent in the region. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I hope I didn't confuse anybody with all that.
Commissioners, any questions for either Mr. Lawyer or Mr. Witham? None? I mean, it's 3 pages and it seems, and it was compulsory, right? There was statutory language change rules. You guys have putting this into practice since 2019 is what it sounded like, right?
Oh, we've had these standards in place since probably 2015, 14,
Okay.
15. It's been well prior to 2019. And we were able to do that basically with the cooperation of developers and their engineers and their understanding that our requirements aren't any different or any stricter than other agencies in the area, primarily Salem and Marion County.
Yeah. Commissioner,
So it's just a nitpicky thing at the very last sentence, chapter XXX of the city's design standards. I assume that you know that chapter because it already
Yes,
exists.
Commissioner.
That's the erosion control section for the design standards, and we have not formally decided what section that's going to be. I think it's going to end up being 200, but we're kind of between that. We just haven't finalized that part of the design standard structure yet. So it'll be 200 or 300, but I think it's going to be 200.
And Commissioner, thank you for catching that. I fully expected that you would, or someone would. That's on me. I intended to let you know that ahead of time because that was one of my questions also. So I wanted to make sure to say that, with the recommendation to council, we do want to have some clarity that, gives staff the ability to put the appropriate reference in there because we don't quite know what that is yet. So it literally is just a number that needs to be put in there. So.
Commissioner Burson.
So I have a question. So the last, I don't know how many meetings we've been talking about, but it's been these changes in development in Keizer where, like the last meeting, we had quite a few areas down here in some of the older sections of town that we're taking a single family home and we're putting in multifamily dwellings in there. And I understand that in the lot, there's this stormwater drain and there should be more roof and stuff like that. But my question to you is is the infrastructure inside the city, you know, the pipes that everything comes to, able to handle all that additional, you know, runoff that comes from these, like say taking maybe a 1,200 square foot home and, you know, with a, you know, 1,000 square foot roof or 1,200 square foot roof, now having maybe, you know, 5,000 to 6,000 square feet of roof, gutters, and of course parking lots with catch basins and things like that maybe weren't there in the past, where it was a lawn beforehand that was absorbing the water. So my question is the infrastructure for Keizer, is it in place to be able to take all this additional development that we've been talking about for probably the last, well, since I joined the commission?
That's a very good question, and the short answer is yes, it is. And the reason it is because one of the mandates in our phase 2 permit is to reduce the amount of water going to the waterways. Okay, flat out reduce it. There's only 2 ways to do that. You infiltrate it or you evaporate it. That's the only way to reduce the amount. I think most of you have heard the term detention, okay? Detention doesn't reduce anything, it just slows down the rate of flow, okay? It holds the water back and releases it at a certain rate. Our mandate is to reduce the amount of water going to the waterways. So we infiltrate or we evaporate. So for a number of years now, in a situation just like you're talking about, where we require the roof drains to be put into dry wells and infiltrate on site. If the site is not large enough to accommodate a large enough dry well, we do allow an overflow, okay, at a certain design storm to the city system. That design storm would not allow any more release than what's currently being released before that additional development.
Thank you.
That's a good point. Any other questions? No. This might be a record.
Don't jinx us.
I don't know, we gotta come up with something. Like, it's not quite dinner time yet. All right. No reattacks? No. All right. Well, I will go ahead and close the public hearing at 7:12. And commissioners, so Shane, if I understand right, you want some flexibility to be able to make that citation in the language, correct? Okay.
It's pretty much a lawyerly thing. The motion just indicates that staff's given direction to insert the proper number, if that's what you're looking for in the motion.
Got it.
Okay.
Any takers? Go ahead, Mr. Herb.
I move that we accept the staff draft amendments to the Keizer Development Code relating to stormwater management with flexibility for staff to include that last chapter.
I'll second that motion.
All right. We have a motion as Commissioner Herb stated it, because Debbie's got it. And a second by Commissioner Saldivar. Is there any discussion on the, yes, Councilor Johnson?
So I presume that the motion by implication is a recommending approval to the council. Correct? Okay.
Correct, yes.
Thank you for the clarification. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously with one absent. Great. New old business staff report.
Thank you, Chair Lawyer. Yeah, just a couple things to give you kind of some heads up more than anything. We've talked at our last meeting, we did talk about a bunch of the different development projects that are going on. And there's a couple of pretty significant ones in Keizer where we've seen a lot of earth being moved around and sites being graded. And we almost issued permits today on one of those sites. However, there's some additional fees that still need to be paid. So the project on North River Road, we should be seeing vertical construction happening very soon. They were out there forming up foundations, it looked like this weekend on one of the buildings. So, and we're expecting permits to come back from the county for a couple of those other projects. So you may start getting some questions as things start actually going vertical, but you have some good tools in your arsenal based on the information we've given you over the last few months on what's happening around Keizer. And that's really all that I have for you guys as far as heads ups to be happening. There's a few other things that may be coming before you in the future that we don't do a ton of. There's been some talk about some master plan amendments and some things like that in the Keizer Station area, but I don't have a timeline on those yet. So that's it.
That was fun. All right, Youth Committee Liaison Report.
Okay, well, this was a really short meeting. I was not expecting that. That was a lot of information. Half of it flew over my head, but I had a question as to like, who exactly like tells us we need to do this? Like you talked about like phase 2 communities and I didn't really understand that, so.
Great question. The phase 2 communities are established by DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality, and that's consistent. Those requirements are consistent with the EPA's and the federal government's Clean Water Act. Okay. So ultimately, Department of Environmental Quality is the regulatory agency that oversees our permit.
Okay, that makes more sense, because I was wondering, I'm like, we're doing all this, but what exactly is the cause for it? So like, is this like over time, they kind of increase the regulations based on like, is it based on population growth or like city growth or?
It's more based on, well, the phase 1, phase 2 piece is based on population and urban development, okay? As I mentioned, Marion County is part of a phase 2 permit city. Keizer's a phase 2 city. We were deemed a phase 2 city or phase 2 agencies because of the Salem urban growth area, okay? Albany, for instance, a city very similar in size and probably higher in population at the time than Keizer, was not a phase 2 city initially because they're out standalone by themselves. So that's the phase piece. Larger cities, phase 1, Portland, Salem, Eugene, Medford, those kind of agencies. And then phase 2 were the medium sized, if you will, urban areas, and those urban areas tied into the larger metropolitan areas. Gresham was a phase 2 city, for instance. So that was all established by DEQ with, I believe, guidance from EPA to be consistent with the Clean Water Act.
That makes more sense as to what that means. And then like, who enforces these policies?
We do.
The city enforces the policies in the development code and the design standards.
And like that passes down to like builders and like the engineers, and
Yes.
then they
Exactly.
include in their plans from now. Okay, that makes more sense. Thank you.
Those are really good questions.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, clearly we all knew that. That's why we didn't ask those questions.
Or we just
But-
accepted it. All right.
We
That's
just
good.
accepted
Yeah,
our fate.
that's-
No, great questions. That's awesome. Come on, Commissioner Saldivar. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm dragging today, sorry.
No, he does, yeah. I mean, I'm kind of speechless on that. So we have the council representative report. Commissioner Saldivar is going to take that for November 21st. For Commissioner,
I think he's.
oh, I did, yeah. Correction to the chair's lack of ability to read. Counselor Tran.
After all of that, I had nothing. No, there really wasn't a whole lot that I have to talk about, but we do have 2 new counselors as of last night's election that will be starting, Robert Hussman and Sarita Cross, and we will be seeing Roland leave and Elizabeth Smith leaving. So there will be some changes next, in a month and a half, and we'll be getting some new people up to speed. So that's really all I had.
I'm just not used to you talking, Counselor Duran.
I know, so I thought I'd say something.
Well, we thank Counselor Herrera and Counselor Smith for their time on the council and everything they brought, and we'll be looking forward to working with the new counselors. All right. What, have I missed anything else?
I got a question, and maybe I missed, we talked last month about this parking requirements. What is the?
CFX stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I can't remember if we talked about this at last month's meeting or not, but yes, we did talk about the parking requirements and ultimately kind of laid out, here's certain things that we have to do. But kind of by consensus from the planning commission, and it wasn't like a formal motion or anything like that. But what we have chose to do with, and I operate at the will of the commission. So if if you prefer us approach it a different way, I'm all ears. But at our meeting, when we talked about it, what was kind of determined or decided was that we really didn't want to go forward and put out a bunch of changes with the pending issue of possibly those rules being shifted or changed. So the reality is for us is that as of right now, as of, I think it's December 31st or January 1st, I don't remember which day it is, I will have to regulate new building applications according to those rules, irregardless of what my development code currently says. The issue was if we tried to dial in an actual change to the development code ahead of that, and we don't have to change it, the feeling I got from Planning Commission is we'd rather not change it unless we're forced to change it. Making sure I read the room right, but I think that's what everybody kind of said by consensus base.
Yeah, I think that was largely to avoid having to come back and do
Yeah.
a second text amendment
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
the same piece, because the rest of the rules, if I recall, don't necessarily go into effect.
There's a
late-
second phase in March.
Right.
So there was the finite, the map that we showed where it was the areas within the distance of the transit lines. That hits January, we'll just say January 1, but I think it's technically December 31st. But, so that hits that date where January 2nd, somebody walks into our office and says, I'm gonna build a new apartment complex on River Road. If they don't propose any parking, I can't require it. But if they do propose it, I can still hold them to our design standards, just not the overall number of spaces. But then in March, there's some additional items that have to be implemented with additional conduit for EV charging and some of those other elements. So that was kind of my plan is we'll bring it all then, and we will clean up the other piece on within the certain distance of the transit lines and spell that out. Still trying to figure out a good model for how to do that language as opposed to just abandoning all parking charts and requirements altogether. So, but thank you for the question.
Yeah, I just wanted to know what, I know we talked about it.
Yeah, we kind of went back and forth on it, and then at the end, that was kind of what we landed on, or at least that's what my notes said we landed on. So
So a developer can, if nothing changes after the first of the year, they can come and say no parking, even though our design standards show requirements, but if they don't propose it, you can't tell them.
yeah, it was kind of like with the House Bill 2001 stuff that we did. Now, we hit the deadline. We actually adopted that like 3 weeks prior to the deadline, which was amazing. But arguably, if we had not hit that deadline and somebody came in June or July 1, I would have had to approved it, or, you know, I mean, technically, if I didn't approve it or our staff did not approve their application, then they would sue us and they would win. So we would obviously follow what the state law says. So,
I'm good, thank you.
yeah.
All right, so just revisiting number 8, Commissioner Saldivar is going to present to council on November 21st. And it sounds like there's a cancel question on the agenda, but we were just informed by Debbie that that's an April Fool's joke in November.
Well, I mean, it could be April all times of the year. Yeah.
April's a great month.
It looks like we will, there's still a chance that we could cancel it if the commission wanted to choose to do that and oftentimes we take December off since it's the holiday season. However, there is a likely scenario where we will need to be bringing something before the commission regarding a historical building and a change to it, a proposed change. So that's kind of where we're at. I'm awaiting some additional information from the folks to see if there's a different way to look at it. But I haven't got that information yet.
So standing by.
So yeah, so as it stands right now, keep it on your calendars because I think we're gonna have to have a public hearing and it'll be something brand new for all of us. Cause in my 25 years of working here, we have never done an application like this or had a request. So it'll be sweet. Kind of exciting.
If we get white elephant gifts, I automatically get Mr. Johnson, so. All right. Anything else? I mean, we got, what did I say? I said 25 minutes when I walked in, right? I was mostly kidding, but this is great. All right. Anything for the good of the order? All right. Well, thank you all for a great presentation, great questions, and thank you for covering for Commissioner Grants. We stand adjourned at 6:25.